Hello, this is Ian Woolf, producer of Diffusion Science Radio. This show depends on your support. Please make a donation directly with the PayPal button at www.diffusionradio.com or support Diffusion by downloading a free audiobook from audibletrial.com/science or go to diffusionradio.com/support and click on an Amazon link or buy my nano drones.
Diffusion, the international science radio show.
We have a bouncer on the doors of perception.
The good, the bad, the ugly.
It gets pretty exciting.
The myths, the truths.
Toxicology.
Astroseismology.
Magnetism. The dark side.
Genetically engineered potatoes.
Planetoid.
Planetoid.
I love that word.
Hello and welcome to Diffusion. Sit back and relax while we inject weird and wonderful science directly into your brain. I'm Ian Woolf. On this edition, visual illusions and computer vision. But first up, here's the news. New Alzheimer's disease treats aging. Treatments attacking Alzheimer's plaques in the brain has so far failed to work. A team from the Salk Institute for Biological Studies and the University of California, San Diego have instead concentrated on the biggest risk factor for contracting Alzheimer's disease, aging. They've developed a compound that reverses brain aging and prevents Alzheimer's disease in mice. The team created variations of a drug originally developed to treat brain injury. They tested these compounds on living human brain cells in petri dishes to see if the candidate drugs protected the cells against various diseases of aging. In 2011, the team showed that the compound J147 reversed damage in mice with inherited Alzheimer's, which is different to age-related Alzheimer's. They also found it improved memory in normal mice. Now they've published a paper in the November 2015 edition of the journal Aging, testing the compound J147 on mice without inherited Alzheimer's disease. Titled, A Comprehensive Multiomics Approach Towards Understanding the Relationship Between Aging and Dementia. Instead of the traditional mouse model for Alzheimer's, the researchers used a type of mouse that ages much more rapidly than usual, and which develops dementia, which is much closer to Alzheimer's in humans. They used old mice, young mice, and mice who aged while taking the experimental drug J147. They measured the expression of all genes in the brain, as well as over 500 small molecules involved with the metabolism in the brains and blood of the rapidly aging mice. The old mice that received J147 performed better on memory and other tests for brain function, and also displayed more robust motor movements. They even looked younger. The mice treated with J147 also had fewer pathological signs of Alzheimer's in their brains. They found that many aspects of gene expression and metabolism in the old mice fed J147 were very similar to those of the young mice. The old treated mice had markers for increased energy metabolism, reduced brain inflammation, and reduced levels of oxidized fatty acids in the brain. Leakage of blood from tiny blood vessels is a problem in aging brains that is quite severe in Alzheimer's sufferers. Mice taking J147 didn't have this leakage from the tiny blood vessels at all. In many respects, the mice got younger. Human trials of J147 will begin in 2016, if only so we can keep up with all the rejuvenated mice. 2015 has been a big year for reversing aging in mice. Diabetes drug metformin was approved to test the slowing of aging in a human trial that'll happen in 2016. Asthma inhalers were shown to reduce age-related brain inflammation in mice. Ultrasound was shown to break up plaques in the brains of people suffering Alzheimer's. Fat with isotopes of heavy hydrogen was shown to slow down aging in worms and mice. And now J147 will be tested for safety and efficacy in humans in 2016. Now that researchers are targeting the pathologies of aging as major risk factors for the diseases of old age, it may not be long before we have a whole bunch of these age-defying drugs rolled into a combination treatment that we all take every day.
You're listening to Ian Woolf on Diffusion Science Radio. Send emails to science@diffusionradio.com. We're brought to you across Australia on the Community Radio Network and podcast over the internet on www.diffusionradio.com.
Astrid Zeman is a PhD graduate in computational neuroscience. She works for Neuroscience Research Australia. Astrid gave a talk on visual illusions at Ultimo Library for Inspiring Science Australia. First you'll hear her talk, and afterwards I'll ask her a few questions. The illusion she spoke about will be linked on the episode's webpage.
My name is Astrid. I did my PhD in computational modelling of visual illusions, and so today I'll be demonstrating a whole bunch of different visual illusions. I'll explain what they are and give some examples of when and how we encounter them in day-to-day living and why they are interesting. I'll talk about some of the applications of visual illusions in computer vision, and hopefully you will all feel enlightened by the end of this talk. So this is an illusion that is not moving. It's an image called rotating snakes illusion that came about by the Japanese researcher Kitaoka. So you'll notice with this illusion that where you fixate, so where you look at, the movement will stop, and you'll see movement happening in the periphery of your vision. And one really interesting, thing to note about this particular illusion, the rotating snakes illusion, is that other animals get it too. So if you go on YouTube later tonight and you search for cats and rotating snakes illusion, you'll see that this is a great way to entertain your cat, is just have printouts of this illusion and it'll be like pouring at the corners going, wait, there's something moving in the corner. So highly recommended for your cat's entertainment. I should maybe explain why we get this illusion. It's something to do with asymmetric luminance steps which cause illusory movement, which basically just means that the black and the white contrast isn't uniform. It's not the same over the whole image, and apparently this is what will cause this motion in the image. So what are illusions? I've just shown you some strange image, and the thing is that illusions are not just these artificial images that are constructed, but we see many illusions day to day, and what they really are is a disparity or a difference between our perception and reality. So reality for this particular image, which is called the cafe wall illusion, is where you've got black and white squares, and each of these grey mortar lines are all parallel to one another. They're not tilted in any fashion, but our perception of this reality is that they are tilted back and forth. And if you ever go down to Melbourne, you might notice there's a building that's been inspired by the cafe wall illusion. This is, you can't really quite see to scale, but people are yay high. So it's on this giant building in the Melbourne Docklands. I'd recommend checking it out. I was very excited when I saw this building. Now, some of you might have seen this illusion called the spinning dancer. It has nothing to do with what side of the brain you're using, whether you're a left or a right-hand brain person. It is caused by a lack of depth cues in this image. So you might see her rotating left or right. This is what's called a bistable illusion because it can flick between these two different states. And this same occurrence happens on the left side through this Necker cube, where you might see the front face of the cube that might change between these two states. And so I don't know, who sees the spinning dancer going left? Who sees her going right? What about both ways? Yeah? So do you notice that when she flips direction, sometimes it's usually when you blink your eyes? Yeah. Can you also influence it in some way? So if you try to think, how do I get her to turn the other way? Can you also influence it top down? Yeah. On the next slide, for those of you who might see her only going one way, this provides a bit more depth information that will allow you to judge whether she's turning left or right based on which limb might be obscuring her turn. I like that I think this illusion came about completely by accident. So I think it was by someone who was trying to animate a woman turning and then noticed that she was turning the wrong way and then was like, oh wait, I've got an illusion here. One really fascinating thing to note is that illusions aren't just something that people have stumbled upon or invented, but something that's evolving every year. So every year there's this illusions competition that comes out for the top 10 illusions in the world. There's a competition for this. It's really kind of fascinating and exciting, and not just looks at what's aesthetically interesting, but also, which of these illusions reveals some of the really interesting underlying neural mechanisms that maybe beforehand weren't explored fully or integrated in these new and interesting ways. So we've got multi-stable illusions. This is an example of an illusion where you get an entirely fictional object that appears, because we kind of assume that circles are round and enclosed, and that this probably would form a triangle. So we would see a white triangle superimposed on the top of this illusion called a Canizza triangle. And that, I guess, is more to do with the influence or the assumptions that we make about the shapes that we normally see within our environment. And we impose these assumptions on what we see every day in the future as well. Surrounding context can also influence the size and shape of objects. So on the left, both of these are examples of Titchener circles or the Ebbinghaus illusion. So on the left you'll see it's a green circle that's actually the exact same size. And on the right, the inside circle is also the exact same size, but by manipulating the outside context, you'll see it deforms your idea of the shape, of the size of objects. Yes, so there's the Ebbinghaus illusion. Now, what I've shown you is, I guess, a bunch of sort of abstract examples of how we can be tricked by our own brains by the assumptions that we make about, objects that we see in our environment. But really, do we see illusions very often? How many times do we encounter it every day? Yeah, hashtag the dress. The internet went in a massive uproar as soon as somebody wore a dress that people perceived as either blue or black or white and gold. And there's an entire journal article devoted to explaining what is the dress. There's not just two different percepts of the dress, but there's, I think, at least there's four. And and I guess the main conclusion from the dress phenomenon was how lighting can influence the perception of the colour of the dress. So you could change lighting to blue or yellow, and that the lighting that we're normally exposed to can influence our perception of colours. So I guess we kind of think illusions, maybe I don't know if they're proving to us that our perception isn't always veridical, that we can be wrong sometimes. But a lot of the time, illusions are pretty useful. So say if you ever watch any videos online, so if you decide you want to watch cat videos later tonight, which I will, or if you want to watch any videos on your phone or on your computer, if you want to watch any television, you're under an illusion, because what you're really seeing is a flickering set of still frames that go around 25 to 30 frames a second. And your brain stitches together these still images into one continuous movement, to one continuous percept. So every time you're looking at your videos on your phone, you're under an illusion. And so that's just one example of where you're seeing illusions every day. Yeah, because all of your devices are limited to being able to only project a frame at a time. So you have a refresh rate on any electronic device that you're using. Yeah, it has some limitation. It just means that our limitation is, unless you're able to see at a really high frame rate, you may not be able to perceive it. One interesting way to test this is to take a video or a photo of your computer screen, and you might see you catch it halfway through its refresh and it's starting to it's halfway black. Yeah, so that's one example of, through being exposed to illusions by using our digital devices. And also, I guess, later tonight, if you go outside and you look at the moon, you might notice that the moon always appears larger on the horizon than it does on the top of the sky. And if you take a photo of the moon, it's really tiny, it's really small. As humans, we perceive the moon as being much larger than it is in reality. And the reasons for it still remain a bit unexplained. I guess one of the common explanations is it's to do with how we perceive the relative size of objects around using the context. But there's still a lot of debate about the moon illusion. But yeah, that's another one that's worth noting that we see a lot of the time. Which of the two men lying down on the train tracks looks bigger? The top one, yeah? Someone said the same. Yeah, they're the same. So if I draw some lines between the two, it becomes much more apparent. And this is, I guess, to do with surrounding depth cues that can influence how we perceive the size of objects. Here we have a bunch of circles that are shaded from white to black. And the ones on the left, do they look like they're popping out at you? And the ones on the right look like they're pushed in. Okay. Well, I'll just flip the image around, 180 degrees. They're the exact same circles. Why do we perceive the ones on the left coming out at us and the ones on the right going in? Does anyone want to, yeah, go. Yes, exactly, yeah, light comes from above. Have any of you seen this particular illusion, the hollow mask illusion? So if you get a mask, Halloween mask, and you rotate it, so the inside of it, you're facing towards the inside of the mask, you'll notice there's one point where it'll pop out at you. I would also recommend YouTubing this later, because you can see a mask on a stick that's being rotated slowly, and suddenly the face will just pop out at you. And does anyone want to have a go about explaining why that might happen? So it's because we're used to seeing faces that come out at us. We're not used to seeing faces that are sunken in completely. But very interestingly is that people with certain neurological disorders, such as schizophrenia, don't perceive this particular illusion, which I find quite fascinating, in terms of that they've found that, this is quite recent research, they don't see the face as popping out. So they will see the mask as being hollow. And it's something to do with the feedback signal coming from later stages of the brain. So they found that people who do have schizophrenia don't have that feedback mechanism to say that, oh, this is a face. Usually you're used to seeing them coming out at you. The thing is, all illusions everyone has their own individual differences. So so when you measure I guess you can measure through psychophysics the level of bias that people have, and bias is kind of the extent to which you may see, I don't know, the Titchener circles illusion. How would you need to adjust those circles so that they look the same? Or those people that are lying on the train tracks, what size, what angle would you need to modulate those train tracks so that you would see the people as being of the same size? So you can make slight adjustments for each individual. And so everyone is different. So I guess in terms of those sort of magic eye stereogram images, they play a lot on depth perception, and people do have very differing levels of depth perception ability. Yeah. I guess I'm interested in visual illusions from a computer vision point of view. So in terms of robotics, such as these autonomous driving vehicles. This is the Google car that has a spinning sensor on the top of the car, and it will drive around for you. And you don't have to worry about how many drinks you've had. You don't have to worry about traffic, path planning or anything like that. You can tell the car where you want to go, and it will apparently navigate through the environment. So one interesting application for looking at illusions is when you look at line length and these sorts of depth, making depth judgments, then you want your camera information to be as accurate as possible so that you can navigate through your environment. So that's one application of visual illusions in computer models. I spoke about robotics. These are the IBO robots that I programmed for national and international competitions 10 years ago. These are the Sony IBO robots. I was going to just say, in the news this year, Google has impressed a load of people with what they're able to do with artificial neural networks in generating some funky images. So you can read about that online. They've constructed this artificial neural network that can extract features, the features of bananas, ants, starfish, screws, and it can also implant those learnt features in images that it sees, which it calls inceptionism. Yeah, it's really cool. You get some really trippy images coming out of these neural networks.
That was Astrid Zeman. After her talk, I began by asking Astrid, what is the connection in your work between visual illusions and computers?
I'm interested in artificial intelligence and computer vision, and illusions can reveal a lot of the underlying neural mechanisms that we use and exploit in order to make sense of our environment. So I was interested in uncovering some of those mechanisms by studying visual illusions and looking at how computers might interpret those images.
So computer vision, is it subject to the same visual illusions as the human brain or different ones?
I found that computers do experience illusions, and they do have similar bias levels to humans, which is quite fascinating.
And what's the application of illusions to computer vision?
So I've studied line length illusions, which can be influenced, have been thought to be influenced by depth cues. And so when we extract camera information, we might make judgments on how far away objects are. So for things like the Google self-driving car, we could harness that information that's streaming in through the camera and use that to make more accurate judgments for distances to objects. The most interesting part of working with illusions is that it's still a very active research field, and a lot of the illusions that I studied in my PhD thesis were cited from the late 1800s, but it's still really active. There's this annual competition for the funkiest illusions that are out there, and they can be tactile as well as visual, and it's a interesting and evolving field.
Where would you look for the illusion competition if you're looking online?
It's called the Visual Illusions Competition. I think it's organised with the Vision Conference, the VSS Vision. It's the annual Vision Conference. It's usually held in the US.
Have you looked at audio illusions?
I do find audio illusions fascinating, but I haven't looked much into that. And tactile illusions are also super interesting. So
when computers I'm just wondering if computer audio and computer tactile is coming. Certainly computer audio is already here. So maybe the illusions will apply.
That might be useful, especially for extracting sound in a noisy environment. So there's this thing called the cocktail party problem, where if there's lots of sound conversations around you, you're still able to focus on the speaker above all of the noise and clamour around you. And I think there have been some fairly recent developments in being able to extract that audio information so you can keep that separate from all the other incoming noise.
Well, Astrid Zeman, thank you very much.
Thanks heaps, Ian. Cheers.
That was Astrid Zeman, computational neuroscientist working for Neuroscience Research Australia. And that's all from us this week on Diffusion. Would you like to join us? We need more people contributing stories to Diffusion. Send your contributions, opinions, congratulations, helpful suggestions, and donations to science@diffusionradio.com. That's science@diffusionradio.com. And please send me email so I know you're listening and you'd like to hear more episodes. Please like the Diffusion Science Radio page on Facebook and rate us on iTunes. Tell your friends. Follow me on Twitter @Ian Woolf and subscribe to the Diffusion YouTube page at youtube.com/C. That's C for channel /Diffusion Radio. Checking production was Charles Willock. I produced Diffusion, which is broadcast around Australia on the Community Radio Network, including 2HHH in Hornsby, Ku-ring-gai, 2NVR in Nambucca Valley, 2XX in Canberra, and 3MBR in the Mallee Border districts of Victoria and South Australia. Diffusion is syndicated globally on the National Science Foundation Science 360 internet radio station and also on astronomy.fm. Subscribe to the podcast on the Diffusion website, www.diffusionradio.com. That's www.diffusionradio.com, and check the website for links, photos and videos about this week's show. If you enjoyed the show, then explore more than 700 previous episodes archived on diffusionradio.com, where the shows are labelled by keywords, so you can focus in on the stories you want to hear. Ask your local radio station to broadcast Diffusion. I'm Ian Woolf. Join us inside your audio device of choice for more science wondering next week on Diffusion Science Radio.
Science is fun. It helps you to learn, to know, and to appreciate. When you study science, you may go on field trips. You discover the marvelous interrelationships between all living things. You learn to read the history of the Earth as it is written in rocks and fossils. You find out what makes things tick. Everything from a molecule to a living organism. In the study of science is found the most useful and satisfying knowledge of man. Knowledge of his physical world, its past, its present, and its future. And in your moments of relaxation, now and in the years to come, you will find the study of science leading you into fascinating pursuits. Photography, collecting. Why study science? Study science because you will find in the study of science a richer, more rewarding life.